Daniel Walker was a man with everything: 45 years old, a seemingly perfect family, a three-generation home full of memories, a wife named Laura, and a son Brandon whom he had raised from a boy. But in an instant, everything Daniel believed in crumbled like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. One fateful day, Daniel returned home early, holding a bouquet of white roses, symbols of forgiveness and hope. But the peaceful air shattered. From the bathroom came a soft laugh. Not from the woman he loved, but the sign of a love turned to betrayal. The door cracked open, and Daniel's eyes caught the most painful sight in his life: Laura, his wife, no longer the woman who vowed forever, but engulfed in the arms of a stranger, beneath cold, relentless water. Daniel's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Silence crushed the room, then shattered by screams and punches, where trust and loyalty turned to burning rage and unbearable despair. But this was only the beginning of a darker tragedy, an unending battle with the law, cruel restraining orders that tore away his family, betrayals not only from his wife but from the son he raised. Daniel was imprisoned not just behind bars, but inside a loneliness that devoured his soul, his life torn apart piece by piece. His story is the echo of broken hearts, a warning about how fragile love is, and how easily lies can tear it down. How do you stand up when everything you thought was solid falls to dust? How do you find yourself again in a sea of betrayal and bitterness? Join me as we walk through the tangled, painful life of Daniel Walker, to feel every pounding beat of his wounded heart, every scar the world has etched on him. And you, tell me, have you ever felt that kind of deep betrayal? Share your story below, so we can all understand and share the burning emotions that live inside us. Daniel Walker's life was once a portrait of stability, a storybook of love and tradition. At 45, he was the proud owner of a three-generation family home, a house that whispered stories of his grandmother, echoed laughter of his wife Laura, 42, and bore the footsteps of his 19-year-old son, Brandon. For nearly 2 decades, Daniel believed this house was more than wood and stone. It was his sanctuary, his legacy, the anchor of his identity. But beneath the surface of calm and routine, invisible cracks had begun to form. Marriage to Laura had been a journey of shared dreams, compromises, and sacrifices. They built their life here, raised Brandon, who was born before they married, with care and hopes frozen in time: college, adulthood, family unity. Yet, the deeper parts of Daniel's mind rumbled with uneasy feelings. Laura grew distant, her laughter less frequent, her silences heavier. Brandon, caught between two worlds, often wore the invisible armor of a teenager grappling with loyalty and confusion. Family dinners that once buzzed with warmth became subdued. Conversations felt like walking on broken glass, each word a test of fragile peace. Daniel's internal battle raged quietly, the desperate hope that this was just a phase against the gnawing fear that something more devastating was brewing behind closed doors. Supporting characters in this drama added layers to Daniel's world. His grandmother, the woman whose legacy was etched into the home itself, had passed years ago, leaving the house in Daniel's hands, a symbol of roots and responsibility. Laura's sister, often a confidant to Laura, played a subtle background role, her visits punctuating the tension with whispered advice and cautious glances. Brandon's college friends echoed his shifting loyalties, some skeptical of his father's growing distance, others unaware of the storm beneath his composed exterior. Daniel's psyche was a battlefield. His love for Laura clashed violently with suspicion. His pride waged war with the creeping isolation from his son. The house they all shared grew cold, walls impregnated with unspoken accusations and regret. In this crucible of quiet despair, Daniel's resilience was forged, but so was the inevitable breaking point. The stage was set for the unraveling, where every memory, every promise, clashed against harsh truths that would shatter the foundation he had spent years building. As the days darkened, Daniel's story was no longer just about a man and his family. It became a saga of betrayal, identity, and the haunting quest to reclaim what was lost. The day Daniel's world shattered began like any other, or so he thought. That afternoon, clutching a bouquet of white roses as a small surprise for Laura, he drove home earlier than planned, craving a moment of warmth amidst growing silence. Yet, the moment he pulled into the driveway, a strange car parked nearby jangled a warning bell in his mind. A sick feeling bloomed in his chest. With his key in hand, Daniel stepped inside the house that once felt like a fortress of love, only to be met by an eerie silence. Calling out Laura's name brought no welcome. Instead, the muffled sounds of the shower sparked a growing dread. And then, he heard it, a soft, playful laugh, layered with warmth yet utterly unfamiliar, like a ghost of a happiness he hadn't heard in years. His heart pounded in confusion and fear. As he ascended the stairs, each step felt heavier, weighted with dread and anticipation. His mind raced to rationalize the scene about to unfold. Could this be his sister-in-law's husband, the plumber, or just a friend? But as the bathroom door cracked open under his trembling hand, the undeniable truth hit him like lightning. There, behind frosted glass, stood Laura, his wife, wrapped in the arms of a man whose face was new to Daniel. Time seemed to freeze, the air thickened. The man's sharp reflexes lifted hands in defense, but Daniel felt none of the calm logic he once had. Instead, a storm of betrayal and heartbreak exploded inside him, rage, anguish, disbelief colliding with the fragments of love that lingered. His mind tore between the past and the present. How many moments had been laced with lies? How had the laughter he longed for turned into this cruel mockery? The betrayal was not merely physical. It was the unraveling of years of trust, dreams, and the very foundation of his identity. Voices clashed, accusations flew. Laura's scream pierced the silence, part fear, part defiance. Every heartfelt memory he had was now tainted, every hope for their family fractured. Daniel's fists flew in desperation, not just at the man, but at the invisible wounds inflicted on his soul. Yet beneath the storm raged a silent despair. The realization that this battle was only the beginning of a far darker journey. The home that housed his legacy now felt foreign, the man he once was seemed to dissolve with every hurtful word exchanged. Supporting figures moved in this shadow play. Laura's friend, once a source of subtle doubts, now felt like a distant witness to a tragedy spiraling out of control. Brandon's absence from this confrontation echoed loudly. His silence a painful reminder of the growing chasm between father and son. In this chaos, Daniel's internal dialogue voice cracked, a mingling of sorrow, anger, self-recrimination, and a desperate need to reclaim control. This was not merely about infidelity, it was about identity lost and the first painful steps toward survival. As the echoes of that fateful day faded into the heavy silence of aftermath, Daniel stood at the precipice of a life irrevocably changed. The betrayal was raw, the wounds deep, but beneath the shattered pieces, the seeds of resilience were quietly sown. What followed that shattering revelation was a plunge into a nightmare Daniel could never have imagined. The emotional chaos from his confrontation with Laura and the stranger wasn't just confined to their fractured home, it spilled into the cold, relentless arena of the legal system where Daniel's fight for justice, truth, and family would unfold in ways even more painful. The first blow hit swiftly. Police officers arrived at Daniel's workplace hours after the incident, escorting him away in handcuffs. The charge, third-degree assault. The man caught in Daniel's home had filed a report, casting Daniel not as a betrayed husband but as the aggressor. In one devastating moment, Daniel's role shifted, from a wronged spouse to a suspect, stripped of his freedom, dignity, and control. Inside the sterile walls of the jail, Daniel's mind was a storm of fear and disbelief. His heart ached not only for the betrayal but for the crushing reality that his family home, the inheritance from his grandmother, the house filled with memories, was now legally off-limits. A restraining order sealed the doors shut, locking him out both physically and emotionally. His key, once a symbol of security and belonging, became useless. His wife Laura moved to enforce her legal power aggressively, painting Daniel as dangerous, recounting a history of controlling behavior no matter how much he protested his innocence. Meanwhile, Daniel wrestled with the soul-crushing isolation of forced separation. His son Brandon, too, had sided decisively with his mother, refusing to believe Daniel's version of the story. Brandon's courtroom testimony echoed like a dagger in Daniel's heart, accusing him of emotional neglect and strictness. Words that recycled the old wounds of distance and misunderstanding. The father, who had once been Brandon's protector, now felt abandoned by the very person he loved most. But the conflict wasn't just emotional, it was financial devastation. Bills piled up. Legal fees flooded his account. Hotel stays became his refuge since he was barred from his own home. Meanwhile, Laura had full access to joint bank accounts and was draining funds freely, further tipping the scales of hardship. Daniel's carefully built life was unraveling not only through the courtroom battles but by the slow erosion of his financial stability. In the courtroom, every shuffled legal paper, every cross-examination, was a battlefield of psychological warfare. Laura's lawyer portrayed her as the victim, a devoted wife giving up everything for the family. Daniel's lawyer sought to dismantle the narrative piece by piece, revealing Laura's affair with the evidence of lavish spending on hotels, jewelry, and gourmet dinners for the other man. Yet, beneath the legal jargon and courtroom drama, Daniel fought a quieter war, the fight to maintain his dignity and preserve the memory of what his family once was. Supporting characters emerged with greater complexity. Laura's sister, once a shadowy presence, now played a more active role during the hearings. Her whispered testimonies and cautious glances hinting at alliances and family fractures beneath the surface. Friends and co-workers watched in whispered speculation, some offering sympathy, others taking sides silently, deepening Daniel's growing feeling of alienation. Emotionally, Daniel faced a paradox. The rage that drove him into that violent confrontation contrasted sharply with the overwhelming grief that clung to his every thought. His internal monologue wavered between self-reproach and bitter resolve. He was no angel, no flawless victim, he had fought back, lost control. But neither was he the monster painted by public accusations. By the time the courtroom drama drew to a close, the restraining order loomed large, barring Daniel from his home and family, for now. The battle was far from over, but the immediate victory had slipped from his grasp. What should have been his sanctuary had turned against him. Yet, within this legal hell, something deeper began to stir, a nascent strength, a flicker of ownership over his pain and choices. The experience forced Daniel to confront not only the collapse of his marriage but the fractured man he had become and the uncertain path ahead. As the gavel fell on this painful chapter, the question remained, how would Daniel rebuild from the ruins? How would he confront the loss of his son's trust and the shattering of his identity as husband and father? In the aftermath of the courtroom battles and legal storms, Daniel found himself facing the most painful wound of all, a chasm growing between him and his son, Brandon. The boy he had watched grow, taught, and protected now seemed like a stranger whose eyes reflected not love or understanding, but disappointment and cold judgment. Brandon's silence was deafening. Once a vibrant teenager full of dreams about college and the future, he now carried an invisible weight. A burden of choices forced upon him by the crumbling world around his family. With his mother's whispered version of events shaping his mind, Brandon became the reluctant witness in a war he never wanted to fight. Daniel replayed every conversation, every missed dinner, every strained smile that hid tension deeper than words could express. His heart broke anew as he came to realize the subtle erosion of his role in his son's life. Where once he had been the rock, the provider, the steady hand, now he was cast as the villain, a control freak who, emotionally distanced himself. Hearing those words from Brandon's lips, his own flesh and blood, felt like 1,000 knives stabbing at the very core of his identity. The resentment simmered beneath their strained exchanges. Daniel's attempts to reach out were met with cold responses or silence, and when he hesitated to cut off financial support for Brandon's college tuition. A decision born of desperation rather than spite, it ignited a volatile mix of anger and despair in their very few communications. Brandon's messages were brief, laced with disappointment. "I don't know who you are anymore, I'm done fighting your battles, I only ever wanted a family." Each text hit Daniel harder than any courtroom defeat. Amid this fracture, other voices swirled around them, complicating the emotional landscape. Laura, still wielding legal power and control, influenced Brandon's perception relentlessly. Her sister, visiting occasionally, offered quiet counsel that seemed to reinforce the narrative against Daniel. Friends from Brandon's college echoed their own judgments, sometimes unknowingly driving deeper wedges between father and son. In the quiet moments alone, Daniel's internal struggle was fierce. He questioned his own failures. Had his strictness pushed Brandon away? Had the emotional distance he maintained as a coping mechanism alienated his son instead of shielding him? The pain of rejection was a cold fire that burned throughout every restless night. Yet in the depths of this turmoil, a flicker of hope remained. Daniel's love for Brandon was unwavering, even if unreturned at the moment, and his determination to rebuild their relationship increasingly clear. He started to recognize that healing would require more than just words or money. It would demand patience, humility, and the brutal courage to face uncomfortable truths about himself and their shared past. This was not a story of simple redemption or instant forgiveness. It was a long, difficult journey, a delicate dance around pain, pride, and the desperate yearning for connection. Daniel envisioned a future where silence might be broken, where walls would come down, and where fractured pieces could one day be joined again. But before that possibility could even take root, the story would lead to another try on rebuilding his own life, reclaiming his dignity, and forging a new path forward. The house that had once been Daniel Walker's sanctuary, the heart of his family's legacy, now stood cold and silent, a stark reminder of the life he had lost. Locked out by legal orders, stripped of his keys and his place, Daniel found himself navigating a lonely existence that no man ever wishes to face. But it was in this abyss of loss that Daniel's true journey began, a journey not just to reclaim a home, but to rediscover himself. In the early days following the restraining order, Daniel checked into a modest hotel with only a suitcase and shattered hopes. The practical burdens, a cascade of bills, mounting legal fees, and the weight of isolation, pressed heavily upon him. Each morning felt like waking anew into a life he no longer recognized. Yet beneath the fatigue and despair stirred a flicker of resolve. Amidst the chaos, Daniel realized his survival depended not on reclaiming what was gone, but on building what still could be. Enter Emma, a figure from Brandon's past, a college acquaintance who had also endured heartbreak and betrayal of her own. Their meeting was accidental but profound, two wounded souls navigating pain, seeking understanding. Emma's empathy was a balm to Daniel's bruised spirit, and their shared experiences formed the foundation of a tentative friendship, one marked by honesty and healing rather than judgment. Through quiet conversations over coffee, Daniel began to confront the emotional scars left by betrayal and rejection. Meanwhile, back at the house that Daniel could no longer call home, Laura's presence lingered like a ghost. The worn wedding photo turned face down in the hallway, the untouched coffee mug on the sink, all these small reminders fueled Daniel's bittersweet memory and sharpened the ache of exclusion. Yet rather than drown in bitterness, Daniel began to channel his pain into restoring control over his life. He redecorated the rented motel room, turning sterile walls into a personal refuge. He sorted through old belongings stored away, deciding what to keep and what to release. Each brushstroke painting the walls, each piece of discarded furniture symbolized a deliberate step toward reclaiming his dignity and agency. Daniel's internal dialogue was a turbulent storm of grief and determination. Sometimes, he drowned in the silence of regret, the what-ifs and if-onlys haunted him like specters. Other times, moments of clarity and self-forgiveness broke through, reminding him that forgiveness was not forgetting betrayal but freeing himself from its chains. The financial strain was relentless, but Daniel took it in stride, finding part-time work, tightening every belt, and living with uncomfortable humility. This was no glamorous comeback, it was survival, day by day. Crucially, Daniel's relationship with Brandon shifted subtly. Though the distance remained vast, occasional respectful and brief text messages from his son reached him, small threads rekindling hope. Brandon had found his own footing in a steady job and new independence, while Daniel quietly celebrated each small sign of his son's growth, even from afar. Supporting characters continued to weave through Daniel's life. Emma's friendship deepened, infusing warmth and support. Daniel's brother, once distant, re-emerged with cautious encouragement, reminding Daniel that he was not alone. These new connections evolved naturally, reflecting the complex, imperfect path of healing. This period marked a profound transformation, from a man shattered by betrayal to one who owned his scars and chose to rebuild. Daniel's story was no fairy tale of instant redemption, but a gritty, honest portrayal of resilience. The journey was far from over, but the foundation had been laid, a foundation not just of new walls and furniture, but of self-respect, clarity, and the fragile beginnings of peace. The courtroom was a charged arena, an unforgiving stage where all of Daniel Walker's pain, hopes, and shattered dreams were laid bare for judgment. As the trial reached its climax, the air thickened with tension. Every word spoken echoed far beyond the walls, touching the very core of what it meant to be betrayed, misunderstood, and ultimately, human. Laura's lawyer painted a vivid portrait, a devoted wife and mother, sacrificing everything for her family but pushed to the brink by a controlling and distant husband. Her voice was steady but dripping with calculated sorrow. Laura herself sat poised yet fragile, stoically playing the role of the wronged woman. Her composed exterior barely masking the storm beneath. Across the room, Daniel's defense tore apart that polished narrative. Receipts, bank statements, and phone records told a starkly different story, of lavish spending on secret getaways and gifts for another man, fabricated tales of abuse to gain advantage in the courtroom, and the painful truth of betrayal woven into the very fabric of their marriage. His lawyer's voice burned with fierce determination, not only to clear Daniel's name but to expose the layers of deception that had almost destroyed his life. Most heart-wrenching was the testimony of Brandon, the son who now sat partitioned by loyalty and confusion. His words, charged with youthful hurt, described a childhood shadowed by emotional distance and discipline, painting Daniel not as the hero of family stories but as a figure of fear and frustration. Watching his son testify this way was a brutal blow, a collision of parental love and the stark reality of fractured bonds. Daniel's internal world shattered and reassembled with each passing day in court. Doubts clawed at him, had he truly failed as a husband and father? Yet, buried under the rubble was a steely resolve, to own his mistakes without surrendering his dignity. The judge's verdict was both a relief and a bittersweet severance from the past. Daniel retained ownership of the family home, the tangible symbol of his heritage and struggle, but was ordered to compensate Laura modestly for her contributions. No alimony was granted, no grand reconciliations offered. The monetary settlement was a pragmatic closure, but emotional closure remained elusive. Walking out of the courtroom, the victory felt hollow to Daniel. He had won the battle over his property and reputation but lost so much more. The trust of his son, the warmth of a family once whole, and the innocence of a love now tarnished. The finality of the verdict forced him to confront a new reality, one of acceptance and ownership, not just of belongings, but of his flawed human story. Supporting characters continued to shape this new chapter. Brandon's estrangement lingered, a reminder that reconciliation would be slow and uncertain. Laura, stripped of much but not her bitterness, faced her own path of reckoning. Daniel's brother and Emma stood by him, quiet pillars amid the wreckage, embodying hope and the possibility of redemption. Through this crucible of judgment, Daniel learned profound lessons. Forgiveness, he realized, was not about forgetting pain or enabling betrayal, but a personal liberation, choosing peace despite scars. Ownership was not just legal possession but owning one's past, embracing growth through suffering, and stepping forward with cautious hope. In the silence following the trial, Daniel looked forward not with vengeance or regret, but with the quiet strength of a man who had walked through fire and come out, scarred but unbroken. And so the story closes not with dramatic reconciliation or bitter defeat, but with the complicated, messy truth of healing, a journey not defined by others, but by Daniel's own choice to rise, rebuild, and reclaim his future. If you found Daniel's story compelling, share your thoughts below. Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed everything? How did you find your way forward? Your words might be the hope someone needs today. As I stand here today, reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize how much this journey has changed me. The pain, the loss, the betrayal, they were crushing at times, but I've learned that even in the darkest moments, there is a chance to find strength and hope. I'm not the same man I was before, but maybe that's for the best. Thank you, truly, for taking the time to listen to my story. Your presence means more than you know. If anything I've shared has touched you or given you hope, I hope you'll consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might need to hear a story like this. And please, if you have thoughts or experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to read your comments. Your support and feedback help this channel grow into a place where real stories find understanding and healing. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to join us on more journeys like this, stories of resilience, honesty, and the complicated beauty of life. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here today. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you love.